So it is a bit confusing to be here and there, your laptop. And so my name is Felipe. I'm originally from Brazil. I live in Berlin since 5 years. And I'm not a technologist exactly. I'm not an economist. I'm kind of an academic occasionally. I have a PhD in design, so it's kind of more open-ended. And I'll try to bring a bit of discussion now that will be a bit more conceptual, but also very much grounded in the real world. So yeah, this is my design studio, Real City. I'm also a member and a researcher at the Global Innovation Gathering. There is a nonprofit based in Berlin that has a network of makerspaces and innovation hubs all over the world, basically, or chiefly in the Global South, Africa, South America, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Middle East. And we have hundreds of members in this nonprofit that have been doing very interesting work connected to open technologies, but not only, and very much rooted in local contexts. And I'll try to bring a bit of my own story. I've been active in this kind of open source culture field here in Brazil for more time than I would like to admit. When Luca mentioned yesterday that in Brazil, in 2003, a lot has been done in terms of claiming to adopt open source software by the government. I was part of that movement. I was very much involved. I have co-founded and been have helped to lead many networks and many collaborative projects all over these 2 decades or over 2 decades. But now I want to bring a bit of discussion about openness and what we mean by openness. And I know there are different perspectives being brought here. So there is this tension that I see a lot, openness as a way to improve things, openness as a best practice to make things run smoothly. But also, I like to think of openness as a way to reshape assumptions. This is where I started. There was a project in Brazil here that was a network of labs in which we would collect computers and reuse computers using free and open source software. And that led me to a very long streak of projects over the years investigating materiality and the reuse of materials. I started with the reuse of computers using open source software, but then I started investigating reuse, repairs, upcycling of materials. And there's a long streak of projects there. It's all on my website if you want to know more about any of this. But this investigation of the materiality of technology, because when I started, we were kind of affiliated with the idea of digital inclusion, creating spaces. And just to remind, I don't know if there are anyone here under 30, but when we started these digital inclusion projects, digital inclusion was not about mobiles. Nobody had mobile phones. Wi-Fi was kind of something that we heard about in 2002, and we wanted to bring. We had this first public Wi-Fi in a park near in Santo André, near São Paulo. But then, so I investigated a lot of the materiality of technology and obstacles to the reuse of things, starting with computers. But then there's this discussion when you go deeper that is, what does it mean? Whenever I hear about the fourth industrial revolution associated to makerspaces, that gives me, the feeling that we have not solved the problems of the old industrial revolution. So why should we try to start a new one? So again, the impact, the materiality of technology. In Congo, the dispute about coltan, mining, e-wasteland. This is a wonderful, horrible video that is available on YouTube. It's called e-wasteland. It's just 20 minutes. There are no talks. It's just a depiction of what happens in Agbogbloshi in Ghana. And as I mentioned, I'm a member of the Global Innovation Gathering. We have members all over the world. Some of them are also in Ghana. They are on the field there. So this is what happens to many computers that are discarded in the Global North. They end up in the Global South to be processed on open fields by people without protection and everything. So when it comes to discussing the industrial society, I like to mention this author, Ivan Illich. I don't know how many of you have read Tools for Conviviality. I recommend. Very good. So there is this tension that Illich poses between the idea of a society that is built around the idea of productivity and conviviality that would be a way to reshape society on other means. And of course, I want to bring, again, I always use this slide, the best boss I ever had. Gilberto Gil was the Minister of Culture in Brazil when we had the development of the Brazilian digital culture projects or programs. And it was a lot about a culture of open source that was influencing many policies. And this sentence that he brings is something that I always want to reference, that people know what they want, but people also want what they don't know. And to me, that shows a bit of the limits of policy, of democratic policy, and the way that we want to discuss, in these projects I want to discuss openness is about a way to rebalance power relations. Again, just to bring, I think one tension that I saw in some presentations is this tension between top-down and bottom-up. I want to just bring, a quick discussion about the circular economy. I see a big problem when you search, this is a image search about the circular economy, there are no people there. And that's one of the questions that I want to bring whenever we talk about technologies or the deployment or openness or DPGs, where are the people? So this is the, the circular economy butterfly diagram created by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I have many criticisms about that. But if you think that these things influence policy, there are some positive effects of that. There is a scenario in the future in which production, manufacturing will be a lot more sustainable because there are all of this new legislation, new policies being implemented and influencing also culture. So circular economy, even though I'm a critic of the way it is deployed or it is framed, it has these effects. But that's, somewhere in the future, maybe in 30 years. Right now, it's not working. There was a video here. It was this zooming out, actually a drone capture of a big landfill. The idea was to show that there are a lot of products that have already been manufactured that are not affected, are not affected by this new legislation. So the world is already filled with things, and it's very hard to understand how to reuse these things. Oh, yeah, here is. Okay, but the video is not working anyway. Coming back to that, so there is this, the left is the biological cycle, then to the right, the technical cycle. I don't agree with that taxonomy. But anyway, when it comes to the collection, maintenance, sharing, reusing, redistributing, refurbishing, remanufacturing, and recycling of objects, the question is who is supposed to do that kind of thing, and how do these people learn? And there are many obstacles to understanding how to reuse things. I've been doing that. That was my PhD research about the reuse of materials in contemporary cities. This is just to show that I've been doing a lot of participatory, open design research studies that eventually led to writing and having approved my PhD thesis. It's called Generous Cities. It's very hard to be understood when I say generous. But anyway, Cidades Generosas, it would be in Portuguese, but it was in Northumbria in the UK. These are 8 design concepts that I created during my PhD research. Let me just check the time. Okay, perfect. So I created 8 design concepts that were different attempts of conceptual ways to address the problems that I was identifying in my research. And over the course of my research, I was investigating, started prototyping, and prototype is a term that I like to also discuss a bit more. But the purpose of my research of these design concepts was finding ways to incentivize and to reward what would be positive behavior. Positive behavior would be, in a sense, instead of just discarding something in a way that nobody would be able to reuse, you can discard in other ways. There are many parts of the world in which there is a cultural habit of sharing things, and there are parts of the world in which people just discard things and don't care if there will be a reuse. So I was trying during my research to identify these kinds of dynamics and create ways to, in a sense, create an alternative to waste management. And it's curious because back then, I was doing my field research in 2020, 2021. Some people even suggested, maybe you should use AI to identify goods and how to reuse them. But back then, in a design school, it was not feasible. And now it's kind of, it's implemented already, but from a top-down perspective again. I was focusing on waste avoidance, but waste not as an object, not as a noun, but rather wasting as a verb. And, oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. The focus was waste avoidance through community-based practices of material reuse. So community is always at the center of my projects. All of the projects that I've done in these 20-odd years have also centered in communities. So it's about human-centered, but human in the sense of communities, of people who share commonalities and create dynamics together. I want to challenge this, a kind of superficial understanding of the design processes that is based on the idea that we can identify needs and then we do some kind of research, identify the best practices and create solutions. And in my research, I've done a lot more on a spiraled way, and I won't even start, there's a whole chapter on this about spirals, but the idea is that we start doing things and then we understand what we are trying to do. An interesting reference is by Dune and Rabi, these two British authors, I guess they're British, about speculative design. It has been kind of popular some years ago in the kind of design field, but I want to bring that to discuss speculative prototyping, because prototyping is used usually in a context in which there is this understanding that you prototype something, you test, and then you put it to scale production, you upscale. And to me, the addition of speculative to prototyping is that we can design things and we can try them, but you don't want necessarily to transform that into a project. Oh, those microphones. Maybe I should stop, focusing on criticism to capitalism, and then the infrastructure would favor me. So based on my design concepts, I ended up creating this kind of a bunch of ideas connected to the idea of digital platforms for urban material commons. Material commons would be, instead of a process in which you buy things, you use, you discard, there is shared ownership and shared exchange of objects, tools, equipments. There are very interesting projects, for instance, libraries of tools, or services that you can hire, you can borrow, you can use different kinds of objects as if you were using books in a library. But there is no kind of encompassing system that people can share about that. So I started experimenting with many different approaches to that in my research. And during the research, I created this concept that was back there, the universal registry of things. That would be a way for people to access information of how to reuse stuff. Then I prototyped during my research ThingWiki, inspired by one of the participants in my research studies that said, you're trying to do a Wikipedia of things. And in the end, it was not exactly that, but I kind of used that as a boundary object during my research. But after that, I transformed all of that into ThingData. And I live in Berlin. There's funding for green startups. And I have to say, I tried that a bit, but it's very limiting what this world of green-oriented startup funds, what they expect from you. It's better to have a kind of bullshit project that has no impact, but you can kind of check all the marks there. And I eventually gave up in trying to develop that into a startup because I wanted to be cooperative. I wanted to be anti-capitalist as much as possible, and there's no money for that. But I ended up kind of composing a version of what would be the ThingData protocol. It's an open protocol, it's on GitHub, And the idea is that you allow different actors to create their own specifications, and it would be interchangeable and federated. But I'm not a tech person, so I kind of vibe coded it. It doesn't work. It works on my computer, or it used to work on my computer on the previous version of Debian. Now it doesn't work anymore. But the idea is to create this kind of discussion. So I use that as a narrative device, as a discussion device. That's why I call it a speculative prototype, because it allows me to show some things. And I think one of the things that I find essential is that there are discussions, for instance, about the digital product passports that are being implemented by new legislation in the EU, but the way it's being deployed is completely top-down. So if I, as a repair person, want to challenge the manufacturer that says that you should replace this part after it was used for 300 times. And I, as a repair person, know that that's not true. There's no way in the DPPs, the way it's being implemented by the EU, to allow that conversation. So this, that's the way I'm trying to develop ThingData. It's a long-term project, very slow. There's no funding for that, so I'm doing it at my own pace and with the support of the Global Innovation Gathering. We're discussing that with other members. But the idea is that it is this protocol for databases that would allow information about goods and materials to be shared among many different actors, and it could be deployed by different nation states, but the protocol would allow any kind of experienced person to post their own stories. So it combines technical, material information about spare parts, components, and the toxicity of different kinds of materials, but also allow members or any interested parties in creating or adding their own stories about the potential of reusing different kinds of goods and materials. The idea is to go beyond legislation based on this understanding that even when legislation is passed, for instance, the EU Circularity, Waste Directive, Right to Repair, they are never enough for the kind of use that we see in this kind of more repair-oriented context. It's data that would help humans extend the lifetimes of things, and I guess each of these terms can be discussed, and each of these topics would I could talk for minutes about. But yeah, the idea of openness as a way to rebalance power relations and to challenge the kind of status quo of economy. My dream is to find ways to create a world in which mining and landfilling would count negatively to the GDP. But until we get there, I guess we need to kind of hack into the possibilities. And we should also demand what is impossible. And that's the way of being realistic. So yeah, that's it for me.